Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to have a mini discussion about the idea of are good faith criticisms dying? This goes hand in hand with another talking point that I've seen come up, and I wanted to expand upon that because I think the two things are related. Not only that, I think that this ties pretty directly to some other things that have been occurring within publishing lately. So what that other conversation is that I'm referencing is the idea that we shouldn't ever post negative reviews. In order to properly go about this, I am going to have to address this first and then segue into the idea of why we do actually need good faith criticisms and also the repercussions if we lose that entirely. I don't want, though, to try and paint the picture that anybody who has advocated for only posting positive reviews so problematic, they're terrible people, because at the end of the day, I think most of the individuals who have this viewpoint are coming from a good place, and I can respect their intentions because I think their intentions ultimately are incredibly kind, and their main thing is that they want to uplift and support. Unfortunately, I do think that that mindset can be taken advantage of, which we'll get into later, but I do want to at least allow for some grace to be given because I don't think that these people are stupid or that they just have a lack of foresight. I think that they genuinely care about trying to do what they can to help an industry that currently is in trouble, given there's so much to do with AI. There's a lot of really horrible conversations about not valuing certain forms of art or certain genres. So ultimately, I do want to applaud people for trying to be mindful and thoughtful when they talk about the books that they have picked up. There are two different sides of the coin, though, for individuals who don't like negative reviews. Sometimes when they have this mindset, they're coming from a place where they think, of course, I read books on occasion that I don't really care for. I just choose not to talk about those. I only want to talk about the books that I like. I personally think that this is more okay than the other side of the coin because in this scenario, if they're being truthful, if they're talking about books that they genuinely thought were fantastic, they're not trying to omit information. They're not trying to deceive in any way, whether they would mean to or not. Anywho, but they ultimately are still being very, very honest. They're just not necessarily talking about the things that didn't really work for them. I still think talking about things that didn't work for you is not only acceptable, but it's a good thing to do because something not working for you, it doesn't mean that it's not going to work for someone else. And you can be honest about that. But I still think that ultimately, if you're primarily focused on gushing about books that you really enjoyed, I get why you would be inclined to do that. Also, not every person who's talking about books online, not all of them have the goal of being a reviewer. Some of them just want to partake in the conversation. Some of them just want to gush about their favorite stories, find other people who love those stories, connect with those people. And that's a slightly separate lane than if you are kind of formally trying to review books and also create reviews that are meant to be informative to other readers. The other side of the coin is that they will talk about books that didn't work for them. They will just not tell you necessarily it didn't work for them, and they'll only present it in a positive light. And this, I think, I can understand the angle, but I also think that in this case, even if they don't mean to, this is misrepresenting. It could just be misrepresenting how you actually felt, or it can sometimes lean into misrepresenting the book itself. And when people do this and they do it over a long period of time, you start to lose trust from individuals who are coming to you for reviews, because if you are consistently presenting something in a positive way and you aren't able to accurately reflect what you consumed, people will pick up on that and they will start to decide, I just don't feel like this person ever is... I just can't trust what they have to say. I don't want to read the books that they're talking about because apparently everything is fantastic. It also is a disservice to the books themselves because even though books are inanimate objects, at the end of the day, you are granting a level of respect to books regardless of age range or genre, or if they're new or older. You do grant them a level of respect when you approach them on equal footing to other things. Also, the things, even if you are presenting something that is fairly accurate and for you was a negative, it might not be a negative first off for someone else, or it could be a negative for someone else, but that doesn't mean that it ruins the entire book or that that book can't still have value. There have been plenty of times where somebody will talk about a book, they'll talk about something about the book that didn't work for them, and I can see where they're coming from and I can see why they don't care for that aspect, but I ultimately think, well, the other stuff sounds really good though, so I think I can, for me, ignore that other stuff because this other stuff would outweigh it. It doesn't have to outweigh it for everyone, but everybody's tastes are different. Everybody resonates with things differently. And not everybody expects every book to be a 5-star book anyway. It doesn't always have to be that everything is the best, greatest thing anybody has ever come across. It's actually okay to have there be things where you shine a light on what worked for you and what didn't work for you. I'm sure this is probably pretty obvious. I do have a bias towards the style of reviewing where you are honest about your personal opinions, but you still, as much as possible, present perceived pros and cons for other readers. So for example, if I read a book and I think it leans on the slower side, but I loved it and I loved the slow build and the intrigue, that for me is honest, but somebody else might look at that and think, I prefer fast-paced, action-packed stories, and honestly, I just don't have the time for something that takes that long to get good. If that's how they feel, they're basing that off of what is, hopefully, anyway, a fairly honest way of presenting the book. There are going to, of course, be discrepancies in what somebody considers slow-paced versus fast-paced, or character-driven versus plot-driven. I think people are too eager to present what other people want to hear and just tell their audience what they think they want to know, rather than actually being honest. And we should want to get to know somebody's reviewing style, in this case books, but if we're talking about just in general, you should want individuals to consistently show up as human beings with their own thoughts and opinions, not just the goal of trying to sell you something or trying to tell you what you already want to hear. As noted, while I do absolutely respect that individuals who hold the mindset that these sorts of reviews can be mean or unsupportive, I recognize that they ultimately are just trying to be kind to artists who are already struggling. I really appreciate that, but at the same time, I personally don't believe it's mean or unsupportive. I think it actually is saying that your stories matter, and I want them to find the right audience. Not everything also needs to be mainstream. Not everything needs to be able to be consumed and loved by every single person, because you're never going to find a book, first off, that accomplishes that. And second, we are all very different people, and we are all going to connect to things differently, and we might connect to things differently depending on the time in our life we are currently at, what we're currently experiencing. So always, I think it's best to err on the side of honesty. But now, kind of expanding the conversation into where I think publishers have taken advantage of this mindset of, no, it's just mean and unsupportive, to be pointing out when a book isn't very good or to be critical of a book. I think publishers are taking advantage of this, and in ways that are fairly insidious. Some clarification and going a little bit more in depth with what I mean by this. There has been a conversation that I've continuously returned to over the last couple of years, and that a lot of you have pointed out. It's something that many of us have been identifying, and it was one of those situations where we thought, is this just me? No, it seems like other people are saying this, but now is this like collective groupthink, or are we on to something? And that would be the level of editing that is being done within books. The level of editing, from what I have observed, is starting to drop. And on top of all that, in having these conversations, I've mentioned to all of you a couple of times at this point that there have been people that have reached out to me that talk about how, yes, this is in fact happening. They are replacing a lot of their in-house editors with freelance editors. They're not having books go through as many rounds of edits, and they're also pushing books out much faster than they would have in the past. A perfect example of this, there's an author of the Green Rider series. This is an older fantasy work that is still ongoing. Recently, it was announced that the newest book in the series would be coming out pretty soon. There was a clarification from the author that was saying, there's just no way the book is going to be ready by then. There needs to be so much done when it comes to editing. There's all these things that still need to occur. Even if they finished it right away, the amount of months up until that supposed release date are still not going to be enough for the release of this book. Because even when you finish your manuscript, anybody who's written a book before, when you finally get to that last page, you know that is just the beginning. There is so much editing that needs to happen. And obviously some authors more than others, depending on how well you structure, how much you edit along the way. There's differences from person to person, and also your level of expertise. If you've been doing it for a long time, you might have it down pat and you don't need to go back as often, but there is still so much work after you've finished your first draft. And so this author is being honest and open about that. However, I was sent an arc of a certain book, not Green Rider, just to be clear. We're talking about a different book now. We're juxtaposing Green Rider series to this. So I read an arc, or I started to read an arc, and I ultimately DNF'd it, of a book that it wasn't just like, oh, there's a typo here and there. And it wasn't that there was the occasional thing that you thought, okay, this is an arc and they'll probably fine tune it. There were things that it felt as though this hadn't been edited at all. It didn't feel edited even a little bit. So there would be points that were repeated continuously, but also came about in a weird order. There were, in fact, typos as well. There were simple things like frequently repeating character names in ways that didn't need to happen. They were amateurish levels that perhaps, because this is the author's debut novel, it's okay when you have that initially because you know we're going to edit it. And I never know what's going on behind the scenes because I know a lot of people want to point to editors and blame them. I very much am advocating for not doing that because a lot of editors would love to do their jobs and actually get to have more rounds of edits, but they're not given the time. They're not allowed to do more rounds of edits. They're just asked to go through, do a quick glance, and then that's it, because publishing is at a point where they know that they can just sell whatever. And this particular arc, I ultimately, because I was sent this by a certain company with the intention of me giving feedback, the feedback I sent was, I hope that they push back the release date of this book and that the publisher, because the people that sent me the arc, they're not the publisher, but I don't need to get into that. They were asking for feedback for a different reason. But I told them, I think they need to push the release date back for this book. I think that they need to go back through and do several rounds of edits. I will be open to reading the book again if they do. I unfortunately do not think right now this author is getting what they deserve from the publisher. And I really contemplated whether I even should have sent that email because I'm like, well, because you feel like you're on your high horse and it makes you feel like you're being patronizing or condescending or something like that. And I ultimately am like, but I want this debut author to have a good debut. I want their work to do well. And I don't want it to be pointed at as, oh, look, another fill in the blank, because I'm trying to be very vague about what this book is. But on top of all of this, I saw that the author has a really big social media following, and I can't help but think that publishing didn't feel the need whatsoever to really put a lot of effort into editing this individual's work because they know it's going to sell. Because they also know they don't even have to market it. The person has a big enough following, they're going to market it themselves just fine. They're going to make their money back right away and then some because they didn't actually have to pay their editors to do their jobs. And that is really disheartening. And also, there are going to be individuals, I'm sure publishing is aware, there are going to be individuals that defend the book because they like the author and that they will want to try and defend it and act like it's good. And any good faith criticism directed at the book, I think some people are going to perceive as an attack against this individual for having a big following. And there is, of course, always that whole, an influencer book. There's always kind of that rhetoric surrounding these sorts of situations as well. But the icing on the cake for me is I went back and I saw when this individual first posted their big news that their book had been picked up by a publisher. And it was, I believe, less than a year before the release date for the book. That is not enough time. That is kind of borderline a red flag that a lot of people don't know. If you're trying to sign your book and they're going to put your book out right away, that's not good news. And I wanted to juxtapose that against the Green Rider series because this is a series that has existed for years and years and years. It's existed before AI started being integrated into bookish spaces and publishing. It's a established author who's been around, who knows what is acceptable, probably, I would hope, has an editor that they enjoy working with. So it's a very different situation, and it highlights the differences between how things were done before and how things are currently being done. Now, tying this back to the nobody should be posting any negative reviews, if I had completed that book that I had gotten an arc for, if I had completed that book and if I had talked about it here, I would have been honest about it not being, in my opinion, up to the standard that a traditionally published book should be. And the idea that in stating that it's somehow unkind to the author is, I feel like, a somewhat surface level way of interpreting the situation. Instead, when we talk about things not having the proper amount of editing, not having the amount of time and care poured into it, and money on top of all of that, because that's kind of one of the big reasons people want to be traditionally published, when you don't have all that being put in, it's not unkind toward the author. It's not unkind towards their career. The real problem is with publishing. Publishing is to blame. It is publishing's fault that they are not putting in the amount of effort that is something every author deserves. So I really think that when I say publishers take advantage of this idea of I don't want to be mean, what they've kind of almost tricked us into doing is accepting the lack of work that they're putting in. On top of that, they are prepping us to be okay with AI replacing all editing. Because if we just never talk about it, then we're basically saying we're fine with it. We accept it. I don't want to point this out because what if somebody thinks that's mean? It's not mean to point out that in the long run, this is hurting authors and other people in the book industry alike. And selfishly, as readers and people who love stories, it sucks for all of us because the quality of the books, it's going to go down. It feels as though it started to go down recently in the last few years, and it's just going to drop completely if AI is in charge of everything. And I wanted to tie this back to a recent video I just did talking about Harlequin and their deal to make these garbage generative AI mini-sodes or something like that. It's right in front of me. I could just look at it again, but I don't want to because it makes me so upset. If you didn't see that video, I'll link it. But they cut an entire line of their books and then now have started implementing, or they're going to implement, these stupid, not always with the consent of the authors, little videos that are made with generative AI. And I know some people feel that they're already fatigued and tired of the person in the videos they're watching once again bringing up AI. And I also know that it can feel as though this is just easy points, that people are just bringing this up because they want to be liked, they want to be seen having the correct opinion, depending on the spaces you're in. Obviously, some spaces really love AI. Can't be me. You cannot find me supporting AI in these ways. Sure, in things like the medical field where you can save people's lives, that's a totally different scenario. But regardless, I recognize that plenty of people are like, I'm done with this. Oh, look, another video talking about how AI is bad. But that fatigue also can feed into it. I don't think that there's anything wrong with continuously pointing out, while we still have a chance at course correcting and turning the ship around, there is still a chance. There's nothing wrong with continuously bringing up. If they're going to continuously do stupid things, if they're going to make these bad decisions, if they're going to, at the end of the day, make reading just another thing for us to gobble up that has no substance, no meaning, doesn't actually have any care for expressing anything about human existence, they're just going to turn it into, I mean, the phrase that a lot of people have used in the past is fast fashion, but it's going to keep getting worse and worse if we don't continuously bring this up and talk about it. So that is my 2 cents about this conversation, and I think good faith criticism, it is needed. We do have to continuously come back. There are, of course, many other angles to this conversation that I didn't even bring into the equation, so if you'd like to provide your own input or provide insight that you have into this, feel free to do so. Thanks so much for watching, though. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.